Richard, talk about, first we'll start with where you were born and raised and where you grew up.
I'm originally from Austin, Texas. Still live there.
Yeah. And how, I know your family's into racing, but how were you first exposed to it?
That's a good question. My uncle Bob Marshall was one of the original Outlaw owners, and my cousin Bobby was one of the original Outlaw drivers. So I got to travel with the team when I was a kid. I cuss him all the time because it's cost me a lot of money since then. But anyway, no, gosh, it gets in your blood, so here I am.
Yeah. Did you ever have the desire to drive yourself?
You know, I didn't, and my dad never would let me anyway, but you know, I probably had dreams about it once or twice, but it never took it very far.
So have you always been involved in the sport? I've known you probably for the last 5 or 6 years. Saw Priority Aviation on cars for maybe the last, I don't know, 8 years. But have you always been, since you were a kid, involved, or did you just start to get back into it?
I got back into it about 5 years ago. I had a goal to run a car at the Chili Bowl, and Shane Carson was going to drive for us, and unfortunately he got ill, so I was out looking for a driver, and that's how Ricky and I got together. So we sponsored him at the Chili Bowl about 5-6 years ago. So it kind of got out of hand after that. So.
And by out of hand, what do you mean? A lot of cars?
I'm spending all of Jennifer's purse money and shoe money and my kids' inheritance and God knows what else. So.
Now, you mentioned your kids. Do they have any interest in sport? I know I've seen your son here at the races.
Yeah, they love coming to the races. They've never expressed an interest in driving, though, so I'm lucky for that. But
yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
So when you started to get involved, you wanted a car at the Chili Bowl. How did it snowball? How did it become suddenly you've got a World of Outlaw team, you've got a midget team with the Marshall with the Clausens? How did it continue to grow?
God rest his soul, I got to blame Brian on a lot because he kind of sucked me into a lot of this, and such a lovable guy, I couldn't help. And we, next thing we know, we're sponsoring him, and then Ricky introduces me to Jason Johnson, and then kind of goes crazy. And we didn't even have a logo for Priority Aviation at the time. Jennifer and I owned a Harley Davidson dealership, and they wouldn't let us run it on the car anymore, so just a branding kind of thing. And so we had to come up with a logo pretty quick, and yeah, it went from there. So
now there's a million different forms of motorsports. Why sprint cars and midgets and open wheel cars? What is it about them that you love?
You can't create the level of excitement you get organically here. It's not everything on the track too. My gosh, it's some of the best people I've ever known in my life I've met at the sprint car races, and we call them our racing family. And not too long ago, I was having a deep conversation with Tim Clausen. I said, let's just take the racing part off and just call it family. So we get a lot out of just the social part of it, to be honest. So
you and Jennifer could travel the world and do whatever. You have a motorhome, and you're basically living the dirt track life now. Talk about that. I know Jennifer is as involved as you are. I watched you guys watching the feature last night, and you're both yelling and screaming, and I love that. Yeah. I love how passionate you both are about it.
Well, she's probably the most competitive person I've ever met in my life, so that's an easy one. I took her to her first dirt race when we were still dating, and introduced her, got pit passes, walked in and introduced her to Steve Kinzer. I said, this is the king, honey, right here. So they talked, and next thing you know, he's out on the track. I said, there's your boy, and she comes running up the fence and catches a dirt clod right here, almost knocked her silly. And I didn't think we were going to get much further. She's pulling dirt out of her hair. She says, what the hell are we doing here, And she turned the corner, though.
I guess
we've had a lot of fun with it. I'm probably the most fortunate guy you'll ever get to know, to like you say, get to travel the country and be with our teams. And you just get so much better feel for what's going on and off the track that way. So.
And when you decide to get behind a driver, what is it that you look for in them, or what makes you get behind the person? Is it their talent, what they're like off the track, a combination of all of that?
Absolutely, all of it, and that was, to me, what always Brian embodied. He was a phenomenal person with his helmet off, and obviously one of the most talented drivers to be on the track ever as well, and that's exactly the formula we look for. we all want to win as much as anybody here, but the person that gets out of the car is just as important to Jennifer and I.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned you've worked with Jason Johnson and Brian Clausen. You've had to deal with the darkest part of our sport, really close to home. Does that ever make you second guess what you're doing, or not?
Well, I've certainly had a pause. I mean, after Brian passed, it was just a huge punch in the stomach. We had actually had already put what is now Clausen Marshall Racing together, and Brian was me and Tim and Brian, and so we all stepped back and just, had that moment, are we ever going to race again? And I think the short answer is what Brian always said: we race on, we're racers, and we try to put ourselves in that position of what would they want us to do, what would they be doing if it happened to us. And I can definitely say Brian and Jason both would want us all here racing. And not to give it up on their account, but they're obviously sorely missed nevertheless.
Of course. What would you consider to be your greatest accomplishment as a sponsor or team owner so far?
Right there, 2016
That was
Knoxville
be my
Nationals.
guess.
Yeah, I can't remember since I was a kid actually feeling my heart jump out of my chest. I looked down and my shirt was doing this in the last 5 laps. It was, that was one of the best sprint car races I've ever seen in my life, whether we were associated with a car or not. That was just a damn good race, and if that didn't make you a race fan, nothing will.
Absolutely.
So,
that was incredible.
Yeah.
When you're involved with a number of different drivers, different teams, does it ever get a little bit confusing for you? What's the goal in the future? Is it to help as many people as you can, or to have a few different teams? I often wonder.
Oh, it's gone crazy. we don't ever sit down and just say we're going to back 5 drivers this year and X next year or anything like that. It's very organic. We've done everything from help kids that we thought would be good talents if they had more money, to just trying to help out as a favor to somebody. And driver development is something that we've become very passionate about, and finding that next young driver that's going to be the next star that just needs a little boost. And it's actually part of what Tim and I have been doing pretty actively since we started Clausen Marshall Racing. So
when you're at the track as an owner or sponsor, what's your favorite place to watch? Do you like to be down in the pits helping out, or do you like to be up here in a suite?
Boy, can you believe this building? How it turned out.
Yeah.
I would have never, I was invited to our architectural meetings and stuff, but I would never believe this place. It's hard not to watch from up here.
Yeah.
Organically, I grew up in the pits, so that's my first love.
Yeah.
But there's just not a better view than up here. So
absolutely.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. Well, sometimes I see things on social media. Jennifer posts you pushing a car out like at a sprint car, but then I see you up here. So I was curious what you favor.
Yeah, I got to stay on top of those guys down there sometimes. They got to know I'm in town. I have to take Swank to HR every week anyway, so I can't imagine if I wasn't there.
That's
he knows
funny.
it too. So.
What is it like as a sponsor working with and team owner? Like you mentioned, working with Tyler, who is an incredible person, but is going to tell you exactly what he's thinking at any moment.
He's an open book.
And the different drivers with different personalities.
Yeah, I think it's like anything, any relationship you have, you've got to treat everybody a little bit different. Everybody communicates differently, and communication is something that to me is key, and I credit it to the success that we've had with the 17 this year, albeit up and down, is the guys learning how to communicate, how to get the cars set up, and none of that's lost on the fact one of our biggest goals is to have fun. We don't have to do this, and we certainly don't make a living racing, but if we can't have fun, it's time to go home. So we try to keep it light.
Yes, and I love that about you guys. You mentioned this building. You and Jennifer are very charitable, and we're a key part in making this building happen. Talk about how important it is for you guys to give back, aside from team owner sponsorship, but charity-wise.
Yeah. Once again, I don't know that we've got set goals of do this much this year and this much next year. It kind of comes to our heart naturally, and this building is no exception. we wanted to give back to the sport, and unfortunately 2 years ago, 2 days and 2 years ago, we lost Brian, and this building ended up kind of checking a couple of big boxes. We wanted to honor him, and started talking about the idea with the board of directors here, and then I presented the idea to the family. We obviously didn't want to name the building without their permission and everything, and it kind of went from there. But beyond that, if you have any measure of success financially or in life, and you can't give back, shame on you.
Yeah.
So that's the way I view it.
Where do you see things going, say, in the next 5 years? Are you going to possibly be doing what you're doing now, but just won a bunch more races, or do you have a goal in the future for your teams? Or
yeah, we might add a car here or there. I want to see what the program we have develop, and championships are big for me. Call me old-fashioned. I mean, nobody loves to win races more than Jennifer and I, but I'd like to see some championships, and if we've got to develop some more drivers to get there. Beside that, we're just kind of taking it one step at a time. So
awesome.
I think unfortunately we have to lose a great talent like Jason, but one thing we're all focused on right now is making the cars and the tracks safer, and that's luckily a conversation that has evolved over the last several weeks amongst the owners, the drivers, and the crew chiefs, and that's something that I think is got to be a serious conversation and some action behind it. I think we got to get better at bringing name brand sponsors into our sport so we can all race. It's gotten very expensive, and I think it's a win-win for the fans. You get better competition and more people that are able to run at the top. So those are some of the things that I talk to people a lot about to make our sport more enjoyable.
How have you seen the sport change in the last 5 years that you've been involved? I mean, from my perspective, I've been involved in sport for 15 or so years, and I've seen it change a lot for the better. I mean, obviously,
we're still getting our ass kicked by the 15, so that hasn't changed.
I mean, the sport in general, though.
I tried to send him. I text. This is a true story. I text Donnie a couple of months ago. I said, Jennifer and I are going to send you all expenses paid to the Caribbean for the next 2 months, and he turned us down. So, but. I can't name one thing that I think has been a groundbreaking change in our sport. It's still competitive as anything. I mean, I was a teenager here in 1980 watching the family car go around and watching Bobby Marshall and Steve Kinser try to kill themselves, and one of the best races I'd ever seen. And that hasn't changed at all. The level of competition, there's always a young driver coming out that some people have never heard of that just goes out there and blows everybody's mind, and none of that's changed. So I'd have to say we all got addicted to this, honestly. So I think everybody obviously wants the same thing. They want the safest cars and tracks that we can, and I think the elephant in the room is money.
Yeah.
Whatever we propose is going to cost money, and we can't make racing 100% safe. We all know that, and the drivers know that, but there's a lot of stuff we can do on the tracks and the cars. So.
Yeah. What about the cost of the sport? You mentioned that it's, none of the owners are really making money unless you can get great sponsorship. Right. Where do you think there are areas that they can help cut costs for owners or teams, or is it a matter of bringing in more TV, more sponsorship?
The World of Outlaws, for example, and not every series is like it, but they run 90 dates from coast to coast, and they don't go in a nice circle.
No.
They crisscross across the country, and I know why they do it. You can't fill the stands continuously for 4 weeks on end in one area with the same fans over and over. So we go back to the West Coast twice and the East Coast 2 or 3 times. I personally think we could cut the race count a little bit, maybe race at some of the same tracks and still bring in a large crowd. But it's the rainouts have killed us this year, and that's why a lot of the underfunded teams are just really struggling. But you know, I wouldn't change anything on the cars per se. I mean, you're always going to have people trying to innovate and come up with the next fastest thing out there.
Yeah.
That's not going to change, nor should we try, in my opinion. I think, you know, let's have at it, boys kind of attitudes, the way I look at it. But just the way we set up the schedule, I think, could help a lot of folks.
Thank you.